By the time Frank gets off the bus with Genevieve and Minot in front of him and Ben behind him, he knows two things. He knows that the two young women have someone coming to pick them up at the terminal, and he knows they're willing to come out and spend a day at the cottage he and his family have on Lac du Plaisir. The few minutes they were waiting in line on the bus, happy ones for Frank, were all he needed to describe to them the cottage, the lake, the surrounding area, and all the activities they could do, such as hiking, swimming, fishing, water skiing, canoeing, and ATVing. So enthusiastic was he in describing all this, and so reassuring about the reception they'd received from his family, that the two young women were soon won over, and indeed almost as excited about the idea of visiting him as he was. No sooner does Frank get off the bus than he goes into the terminal and warmly embraces his mother. Then he dashes back outside to help Genevieve and Minot get their luggage off the bus and into the terminal. All three of them wait for the bus driver to open the big side compartments of the bus where all the suitcases, boxes, duffel bags, and other things belonging to the passengers are stowed away. Meanwhile, Frank continues to describe to them all the wonderful features of the region he lives in. He is particularly proud of what his mother calls their little jewel of a lake, Lac du Plaisir. He tells them about the little islands in the middle of this lake that are great for building campfires on and even camping overnight. And then he tells them about the little sandy beach not far from where his cottage is. And then he describes the size and depth of the lake, as well as all the fish that are in it. Then he tells them about the time Ben and he went fishing on it, and Ben was catching so many fish compared to what he was catching. Ben ended up with 44 fish, and he ended up with 27. He finally shouted at him in annoyance, "Quit catching so many fish. Leave some for me." A few minutes later, Frank carries a monstrous suitcase into the terminal. Although he insists to Genevieve he can handle it, it's so heavy he can hardly believe she travels with it. As soon as he gets into the terminal and puts it down, he leads her over to his mother and introduces her. Using all the charm and humor he can muster, he soon gets the two women, or as he calls them, the two young women, engaged in a friendly and indeed lively conversation. Once he has brought the rest of the luggage in, Minot has 3 suitcases and Genevieve has 5, Frank leads Minot over to where her friend and his mother are. After he has properly introduced her to his mom, he praises both of the young women for having been such wonderful companions on the bus. Then, hardly stopping for breath, he begins relating how all 4 of them met and got to know each other. He tells his mother how the 2 young women sat down in the seats across the aisle from Ben and him after escaping from 3 young men who had been giving them a hard time at the back of the bus. When Madame Prevost wants to know if this resolved the problem for the 2 young women, Genevieve tells her that unfortunately one of the young men came up to them shortly after she and Minot had reseated themselves and continued to give them a hard time. He was so obnoxious and full of himself that not only did he give them heck for having left him and his 2 friends at the back of the bus, but also for not having sufficiently appreciated their company. He and his two friends, she exclaims, were cracking up over sexist jokes, and Minot and I were supposed to sit there and enjoy it. Then she tells Madame Prévost how Frank intervened on their behalf by telling the obnoxious young man to cool it. After hearing all this from Geneviève, as well as the fact that this same obnoxious young man wanted to have a fight with Frank, Madame Prévost tries to find out more about what happened. However, Frank is reluctant to talk about this, and so she ends up scolding him for always getting into scrapes of this sort. Geneviève then comes to his defense by telling Madame Prévost that her son handled himself very well, not only when the young man came up to them on the bus and started hassling her and Minot, but also later when all of them got off the bus in Cucamonga and a confrontation between Frank and the three troublemakers seemed likely to happen. However, before she can get too far in this account, Minot gets a call from a friend of hers who tells her that the young man who's coming to pick them up has been delayed and won't arrive at the terminal for another hour. Upon hearing this news, Geneviève breaks off from telling Madame Prévost about a radical feminist called Harlotta Hardbottom, who got mixed up very early in the dispute between Frank and the troublemakers. After listening to Minot explain why the young man has been delayed and why he's not available to explain the delay himself, she angrily tells her that if she weren't her very best friend, she'd put all her luggage in a taxi and leave right now. When Frank tries to find out more about this issue, neither of the two young women seem to be in the mood to give many details. Finally, he asks them why they simply don't cancel their arrangement with the young man and take advantage of his mom's van that has room for all of them as well as their luggage. While Geneviève tells him she's very much tempted by this offer, Minot frowns and then, after politely thanking Frank, informs him they can't accept it for reasons that aren't easy to go into. Then, with a displeased look on her face, Geneviève suggests to her friend that these reasons she's referring to are perhaps not as good as the reasons she has for completely forgetting this young man who's causing them so much trouble. Looking hurt, Minot then tells Geneviève that if she really doesn't want to hang around the terminal any longer, she should take up Frank's offer and leave her to wait by herself. Before anything further can be said, Frank shouts, "Wait, wait, there must be a better way to handle this situation. I think it's over there."